Starfleet Academy, Cadet Kirk, Chapter 5. Both McCoy and Spock simply stared at the younger cadet as if his head were falling off. Crash land on purpose? I cannot condone that, Spock said. Too much risk. The cadet's bright eyes took on a naughty glint. Risk can work in our favor. Spock shook his head. Such action would be reckless. Or it might save our lives, the cadet said. He looked at the forward screen, and there the planet was very close. In fact, all they could see now was a great brown and gray landmass flanked by two large bodies of greenish water. But the cadet was sure he was right. If we let them pull us in, then they can call all the shots. Whatever their plan is, we've got to make it go wrong at every turn. How can we judge their intentions? The Vulcan argued. They may have a valid excuse for this. Not valid enough for me, the younger man shot back. Starfleet expects me to get the Spitfire to Colony Cambria safely, and it expects me to bring you in safe too. Anybody who throws a tractor beam on a vessel without saying why is just a criminal. This may be malfunction, Spock insisted. An error of some kind, or someone on the planet may need help. The cadet's brows shot together. I don't believe that, sir. I don't think you do either. I know one thing. Whoever wants to get their hands on us, I don't want to deal on their terms. I want them to have to deal on ours. Cadet, Spock said steadily, this mission has gone off course. When that happens, the senior officer takes over the decision-making process. It is my option to decide what action to take. We will allow ourselves to make a safe landing at the source of the tractor beam. Then we will take one step at a time. Without moving, McCoy watched them both. Which of these strong personalities would win the moment? One consumed with rules and regulations, the other consumed with logic. If only I could take notes. What a great experiment this would make. If only they weren't about to skid onto the surface of a strange planet. Are they bringing us in on a landing trajectory or a burn-up trajectory? Cadet Kirk suddenly asked. That'll tell us whether they're trying to kill us or not. In the co-pilot seat, Spock touched the controls and brought up those numbers. Angle of approach is a landing angle. Apparently they want us alive. They want hostages, the cadet corrected. Buckle up, he added, feeling for his safety harness and locking it around his hips and chest. In the co-pilot seat, Spock distractedly found his own harness and snapped it on. McCoy knew he should go into the main compartment, lock himself into a lounge, but if he let go of the seats now, he would lose his balance and go crashing, and he was hypnotized by the high-speed rush toward the atmosphere. He couldn't pull himself away. We're coming into the atmosphere, he blurted suddenly. He pointed at the screen, where a white-green haze blurred the shapes of landmasses below. Wind and dust particles blew past the small craft, and the Spitfire began to whistle as if it were being spun at the end of a string. The screen flashed with gusts of atmosphere and clouds. The craft rocked and shuddered, but held together. Cadet Kirk leaned forward, bit his lip, and concentrated hard. When the ship tilted too far to one side, he brought it back, until it tipped too far the other way. Then he had to compensate again. Spock was doing something too, but McCoy didn't know what. Braking thrusters, maybe? The two weren't saying anything, but they were cooperating somehow, keeping the shuttle under some control, in spite of the powerful tractor beam. We're heading straight for the meteorological station on the southern continent, Cadet Kirk said. The kidnappers must be using it for a headquarters. I suggest that we do not yet know, Spock responded, whether these are kidnappers or not. What else can they be? McCoy asked. They could be stranded here, possibly from another crashed vessel. Perhaps they have a tractor beam on their wreck, and it's their only way of gaining attention from passing craft. McCoy glanced at Cadet Kirk, who shifted his eyes but didn't move his head or change his attention. That's pretty far-fetched, McCoy said then. In space, Doctor, the Vulcan told him, The far-fetched happens every day. McCoy paused for a moment. That was the first time he'd been called doctor. How strange and new it sounded coming from Spock's elegant, precise voice. Suddenly, the shuttle started shaking violently. Was the hull holding together? Were those overlapping seams Cadet Kirk had pointed out to him now coming apart? The land in front of them changed from a blurry mass to a pattern of hills with trees and with thin dirt roads cut through them in some places. Leveling off, Cadet Kirk strained. He had to squint through a heavy fog in the region. Before them on the screen, thick white haze was interrupted only by lumpy growth popping up under them. Visibility is 17 meters. Not much at this speed. Let the computer guidance take over. Spock touched his controls. Atlantis Outpost's landing signals will bring us to the pad. Hold the ship as steady as possible. Watch for obstacles. Sensors are reading some tall trees. Curious, the Vulcan was willing to take over the decisions about the mission, but not the actual piloting of the craft. Cadet Kirk had been assigned this ship and was expected to fly it in all conditions. Maybe there were legal reasons, regulations, or maybe there was some tradition involved. He didn't know. A quick jolt to the right broke his grip on the back of Cadet Kirk's seat. McCoy went sprawling into the tight space behind Spock's seat. He managed to raise his arm and take the impact on his elbow against one of those beam brackets. The movement sent blinding pain running through his upper body. When he struggled to his knees again, holding his throbbing arm, the Spitfire was soaring through open air over some kind of valley floor. On both sides, jagged hills reached up like teeth in a pair of open jaws. "We're shallowing," Cadet Kirk shouted over the howl of the engines and alarms. "Force the nose up!" McCoy hunkered back on the heaving deck, keeping most of his body behind Spock's chair, but peeked out at the main screen. The valley floor shot by, and on the horizon was a complex of flat-topped buildings painted a light green soup color. There were stacked towers of metal attached to the buildings and several huge portable glass structures like greenhouses scattered on the meteorology station's campus. That was the place they were being drawn into, Atlantis Outpost. "There they are," Cadet Kirk said. McCoy looked up. On the screen, inside the bright red, yellow, and red circles of the landing pad, were several men watching them come in. "What are they holding?" he asked. "Laser rifles, that's what." Abruptly, Captain Cadet Kirk leaned into his controls, snapped off a couple of connections, and took the throttle in his right hand and the steering wheel console in his left. He leaned forward, and the engines whined in response. "Cadet," Spock shouted, "we'll overshoot the complex." The cadet nodded sharply. "I'll be sure to do that, sir." At that instant, the Atlantis complex sheared past beneath them. Instead of veering toward it, the craft muscled past, screaming and fighting against the tractor beam. "That was not an order." Spock reached out for the piloting controls. "Stop immediately!" The cadet put out his own hand, just long enough to nudge Spock back. Not exactly a hit, but a firm bump. "Too late, sir." "Release your controls, cadet." "It's too late. Everybody hang on. We're crashing." Starfleet Academy, Cadet Kirk, Chapter 6. Blustering noise pounded in Leonard McCoy's throbbing ears. The cabin flashed with violent patches of light and darkness. Hard forces pounded the outer skin of the Spitfire. They must be clipping the tops of trees. Branches reached up and swatted the shuttle as it rollicked closer to the ground. Red and yellow flashers on the console cast terrible shapes on the bulkheads. Those were warning lights. The engines were fighting to keep the ship up, but the tractor beam had dragged it down. Now they had to go all the way down before they could repair things and go back up. Taking a hammering, the little craft zagged between the trees. McCoy caught sight of Cadet Kirk's muscular arms working back and forth and his shoulders hunching. Then everything went dark. McCoy felt as if he were sitting inside a kettle drum. Boom, 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 boom. He hunched his own shoulders, pressed his right side against the back of Spock's seat, and crammed his eyes shut. "Scratch!" That came from underneath. They were scuffing the ground. Swerving like a hornet, the Spitfire carved a path for itself through the undergrowth, bustling branches and smashing the edges of rocks. If one of those rocks struck them just right, it could cut the shuttle open like a melon. Boom, 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 crack! McCoy's shoulder slammed hard against the seat, his hip driving into the deck. Then he was picked up for a few seconds and dropped again in a different position, with the side of his face on the carpet. With a final bump, the Spitfire skidded to a stop against a solid object out there. Leaning at a sickening angle, the little ship bleeped and wheezed and gasped. The alarm stopped ringing. The sensors stopped trying to tell them that they were too close to the planet's surface. It was dark in here now. Are the others alive? There wasn't any sound from either of the pilot seats. Ouch! A voice. Certainly wasn't Spock. A Vulcan would say, ouch. A Vulcan would say, noting pain in an extremity. Must be Cadet Kirk. Invigorated by the sound of a patient in need of help, McCoy found the strength to push himself up. He could see something now. A faint emergency light had popped on. The little light was pink, easier on the eyes and wider yellow. It cast a candy apple glow on the tilted deck and seats. At his side, the bulkhead was bent inward, as if punched from outside. Of course, that was exactly what had happened. As he gazed at the bulging bulkhead, he noticed that Cadet Kirk had been right. That overlapped clinker plating had held. McCoy pulled himself up and looked between the seats. Cadet Kirk sat blinking forward at the dark screen, coughing on puffs of electrical smoke from his console. McCoy shimmied between the seats. "Are you hurt?" "I don't think so," the cadet rasped, then coughed again. He reached to his left, punched a toggle, and a ventilator started whirring in the ceiling. The smoke twisted happily and raced toward the ventilator. "Ensign?" McCoy put his hand on the Vulcan's arm. "Spock!" Spock jolted as if startled, blinked, and looked at him. "We're down," he uttered. "Yes, we seem to be." Carefully, McCoy touched a wound on the upper left side of Spock's face. Green blood dribbled from the abrasion, which was surrounded by a quickly spreading bruise. "Where are we?" Spock asked, fighting for consciousness. Cadet Kirk waved at the electrical smoke. "Looks like we came down about 14 kilometers past the complex." The Vulcan grasped the console before him and tried to pull forward. "We have to get out in case the coolant ruptures." "Hold still," McCoy told him. "Does this crate have a first aid kit?" "Starboard side aft," Cadet Kirk said as he unbuckled his harness. "I used it for a pillow last night." "Both of you sit still." McCoy hurried back along the tilted deck to the rear part of the ship, then fished around on the starboard side. He found the first aid kit, a leather-like pouch with a magnetic pressure seal. Cradling it in one arm, he pulled himself forward again. By the time he got back, the cadet and the ensign were arguing again. "As soon as I saw their weapons, I reacted. There wasn't time to ask what I should do. I just did it." "From now on, Cadet," Spock said instantly, "you will take no action without consulting me. If there's no time, my last orders will stand. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir, it's clear." "What is this place?" McCoy asked. "What does Atlantic Outpost actually do?" "It's a weather control experimentation station," Cadet Kirk said. "It's part of terraforming this planet for agricultural colonization, but mostly they're trying to figure out just how much weather can be controlled." "How do they do that?" "With satellites," Spock filled in. "Computers map out natural weather conditions and project likely changes. Then, satellites are used to redirect the sun's heat to various areas or deprive other areas of warmth." "Why would anybody want to control weather?" "Controlling rainfall alone can have a great effect on farming conditions. Barren continents could be made green. Wet areas could be made more arid, better for certain crops and animals. However," Spock winced as McCoy dabbed at his head wound, "creating weather is one thing, manipulating it is another." "Doesn't sound like such a big deal," McCoy grumbled. On the contrary, the Vulcan said, one hurricane has more energy than all the nuclear weapons produced in the entire 20th century. If that power could be harnessed, it would be a fabulous resource. If they can do that on an unpopulated planet like this one, Cadet Kirk filled in, they'll be able to use it on other planets too. They can put water in places where people are dying of drought, or dry up places where there's too much flooding. Sounds good to me, McCoy commented. At the moment, he found it hard to care about a little weather control. What about a mayday? The cadet asked then. We should broadcast one right now while we have the chance. That may not be the wise course, Spock told him. Cadet Kirk made a motion at the console with one hand. The beam is off us now. According to regulations, we have to broadcast a mayday right away. A distress call signal could also be a homing signal. Spock was unbuckling his own harness now. There is nothing in the regulations dealing with being kidnapped, Cadet. But there are regulations that deal with accidents and with crimes. This is one of those. Maybe both. Which manuals have you been reading? McCoy asked as he pressed a patch of sterile gauze to Spock's injury. All of them, Cadet Kirk answered. He looked at Spock again. Sir, now that we're on the ground, we're compelled to follow procedure. We're required to report in so a search party can be deployed. Otherwise, nobody will know where or when we were pulled off course. They could search for years and not find us. I'm sending a message with coordinates. The kidnappers could zero in on our signal, Spock said. Then they will be the ones to find us. We've got to leave some kind of trail, or we could be stranded on the station for years. I don't think you want that any more than I do. When neither of them dared argue that particular point, the cadet added, I'm going to send an automated mayday before we lose our power. Then it'll be too late. McCoy and Spock looked at him, but neither said anything. Very well, Spock finally said, but you send it under my official protest. Noted, the cadet said. He reached forward and deliberately punched in a mayday code with their location, then hit the broadcast button. The cadet looked at Spock for one more second, then pushed out of his seat. He crawled over McCoy and leaned to check something on the port side of the cockpit. We've still got our coolant, he said. No rupture so far. We might be able to take off again if we can get the ship into a clearing. I've got a come-along and 4 anti-gravs in back, and there's a laser torch we can use to cut trees. Let me up, please, Spock said to McCoy. I'll let you up in just a minute, McCoy said. I want to make sure you don't have a concussion first. A head injury is nothing to play with. Hurry, Spock instructed. We're now working against time. Another half meter. Almost there, McCoy gasped. Together, he and Spock heaved on the cable of the handheld come-along, a contraption made to loop around a tree or rod, then crank its cable tighter and tighter. 30 feet away, Cadet Kirk managed 2 anti-gravs attached to the Spitfire's bow. The little ship was crammed in between 2 very big trees. If it had hit either of those trees head-on, it might have disintegrated, but it was just wedged, and with some power and leverage, they could get it out. Crank, crank, crank. Inch after inch, the cable tightened. The shuttle's blocky hull scratched backward toward them. On top of the rectangular-shaped hull, a small communications unit blinked silently, sending their distress beacon into space. Was it strong enough to reach the space lanes? Suddenly, the shuttle slid harshly to one side and clunked to the ground. That's it, the cadet called from the bow. We're clear of the trees. He came jogging toward them. We should be able to cut our way out of these bushes, then the anti-grav the Spitfire over to that clearing. What good will it do to get to the clearing? McCoy asked. We can't take off just to get caught in that tractor beam again. We might be able to skim the planet's surface and find another angle away from here. Spock straightened and rubbed his hands, which were grooved and sore from gripping the come-along's handle. That's assuming the tractor beam has a narrow band. If it has a wide one, we may end up crashing again. We may not be so fortunate a second time. Then we have to turn off the tractor beam at the source. McCoy looked at him, then at Spock, and waited for an argument to break out. He was licking his chops so at which side to take when Spock surprised him completely by saying, "That is very logical." The cadet shifted his feet and his face flushed a little. He appeared almost embarrassed by getting the Vulcan's approval, which seemed to be rare indeed. "Then that's the plan?" "I would accept that as a primary goal," Spock said coldly. "We shall see if it proves more dangerous than it sounds." The Vulcan walked away to the other side of the shuttle. So much for approval. Deprived of his victory, Cadet Kirk clamped his mouth shut and dodged inside. He came out again with 2 laser torches. Tossing one to McCoy, he grimly set about cutting away the branches and vines that had snared the Spitfire. "I guess I should help," McCoy muttered, and tried to figure out which end of the torch the laser beam came out of. Just when he found the business end, a loud whine cut through the air around them, as if out of nowhere. He looked around, into the sky where the sound was coming from. Cadet Kirk came dodging out of the bushes, craning at the sky. Ensign Spock reappeared from behind the shuttle. Before anyone could speak, 2 small buzzard-like crafts soared in at them and strafed the crash site. "They found us," Cadet Kirk blurted. "They followed our Mayday beacon," Spock called over the howl of the circling attack crafts. There were 2 of them, small 2-man atmospheric vehicles, very common, used for everything from regional defense to taxicab service. They weren't Starfleet craft, but just common, everyday planetary runabouts. They swooped down to have a look at the 3 castaways, then veered off and came around for another pass. As they came around, a narrow white glow appeared on the nose of each craft. "Take cover," Cadet Kirk called. He waved them toward the trees. "They just armed their weapons."